Google warns it's dangerous. Developers call it a piracy paradise, and tech giants have spent millions trying to shut it down. But with over 1 billion downloads, Aptoide might just be the most important app store you've never heard of. What if I told you that this tiny Portuguese company is single-handedly changing how we download apps forever, and that they've somehow managed to survive all-out warfare from one of the most powerful companies on Earth? The story of Aptoide isn't just about apps. It's about who controls what goes on your phone, and why Google and Apple are absolutely terrified of what happens next.
Wait, back up a sec.
Most of us just download apps the normal way, right? You open that little Play Store icon on your Android or the App Store on your iPhone, and boom, there's your apps. It's easy to forget that the whole system is actually pretty weird when you think about it. Like, there are literally millions of apps out there, but only 2 companies, Google and Apple, decide which ones you're allowed to install. And, oh yeah, they also take a massive 30% cut of all the money that flows through these stores. I mean, imagine if you could only buy groceries from one store in your entire city, and that store got to decide what products were allowed on shelves and took 1/3 of all the money. You'd be like, isn't that a monopoly or something? That's basically what we've accepted as normal in the app world, and that's where our story begins. Back in 2009, this Portuguese computer science guy named Paulo Trezentos had a pretty simple idea. What if anyone could create their own app store?
Wait, what?
Trezentos isn't some big shot tech CEO. He was literally working on his PhD when he started building what would become Aptoide. The name, by the way, is this weird mashup of APT, the package manager for Linux, and Android.
I know it's nerdy.
But the concept was genuinely innovative. Instead of one centralized store controlled by a single company, Aptoide would be thousands of mini stores all connected together. Think of it like if every YouTube channel could also be its own little app store, or an Amazon where you could sell apps. That means you could have stores focused just on games, or productivity apps, or whatever each store owner decides what apps they want to include. The other big difference, Aptoide only takes a 19% commission instead of Google's 30%. That extra 11% might not sound like much, but for developers making thousands or millions of dollars, it's a huge deal because every penny counts. Now, the obvious question. If this is so great, why isn't everyone using it? Well, for one thing, Google really doesn't want you to. If you try to download Aptoide, you'll get these scary warnings about how it might damage your device or steal your data. Google's Play Protect system actively blocks it. And honestly, some of those concerns aren't completely unfounded. Alternative app stores have a bit of a sketchy reputation. See, without Google's strict approval process, some apps can slip through. In 2018, a security firm found that about 25% of apps on Aptoide had some kind of security or privacy issue, which is not great. Then there's a piracy problem. Let's be real, a lot of people use Aptoide to get paid apps for free. It's basically the Napster of app stores. Some developers have found their premium apps being distributed without their permission, which obviously sucks if you're trying to make a living creating apps. So yeah, there are legitimate reasons to be cautious, but that's only one part of the story. Now, what I'm about to tell you is where things get wild. Instead of fully embracing its reputation as this Wild West piracy paradise, Aptoide started making some changes, at least on paper. Around 2019, they launched this Aptoide Trusted Badges system that supposedly verified legitimate apps. They created an anti-malware scanner and claimed it could catch problems that Google might miss. They also started talking about removing pirated apps and implemented a system where developers could report unauthorized versions of their software. Now, let's be real here. Did this actually solve all the problems? Not even close. The App Store still has tons of questionable content. A quick search online shows plenty of users and developers who remain skeptical of these supposed improvements. But these changes weren't really about becoming perfect. They were about creating just enough legitimacy to fight a bigger battle. Because despite all its flaws, Aptoide had identified a genuine problem in the market. Google's complete control over app distribution. They were about to pick a fight with one of the biggest companies on Earth. In 2020, Aptoide joined forces with other app stores and developers to form this team against Google. They filed a massive antitrust complaint in the European Union, claiming Google was using its position to crush competition. So what was Google's response to this newly formed collaboration? Within weeks, Google's Play Protect started flagging Aptoide as a dangerous malware, not just with a little warning, with these huge, scary pop-ups. If you tried to install it, Android would basically scream at you that your device was at risk. Even worse, users who already had Aptoide installed suddenly couldn't access their apps. Google was using their control over the Android operating system to actively sabotage a competitor. It was like if Microsoft decided one day that Premiere Pro was dangerous and prevented it from opening on any Windows computer. I'll be out of business if that happens. So the message was clear. This is our platform and we decide what runs on it. Aptoide's user base dropped by about 20% almost overnight. For most companies, this would be game over. But then something unexpected happened, and you won't believe me when I tell you this. The EU actually sided with Aptoide. In July 2022, the European Commission ruled that Google had been abusing its dominant position to prevent fair competition. They slapped Google with a €4.34 billion fine, that's billion with a B, and demanded they stop blocking alternative app stores. Suddenly, Aptoide wasn't just some sketchy alternative anymore, it had legitimacy, it had EU backing, and most importantly, it had momentum. Epic Games joined forces with them after their own battles with Apple and Google. Then Samsung quietly started collaborating. Even Amazon, with its own alternative app store, showed interest. All these companies realized the same thing. Why should Google and Apple get to be the gatekeepers for the entire mobile ecosystem? I actually downloaded Aptoide again around this time and was honestly shocked by how much it had improved. The interface was slick, the security was tight, and I could find pretty much any app I wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was legitimate. By 2023, Aptoide had transformed from this weird fringe app store into a serious contender. They hit 300 million active users. That's almost the population of the entire United States. They were processing over 10 billion downloads per year. But the really fascinating part was seeing who was using it. It wasn't just tech nerds and pirates anymore. In Brazil, Aptoide had a 32% market share among Android users. In parts of Southeast Asia, it was the preferred way to download apps. Even in Europe, it was gaining ground. What really surprised me about Aptoide's user base was how diverse it had become. This wasn't just tech rebels and people looking for free apps anymore. In some countries, regular people were using it without even realizing they were part of some grand revolution against big tech. I saw forum posts from older users who didn't even know that they were using an alternative app store. To them, it was just the app store their family member had set up on their phone. That's when it clicked for me. Aptoide wasn't winning because they were some noble crusader against big tech. They were gaining traction in certain markets because they were filling gaps that Google left open, especially in countries where Google's presence wasn't as strong. They were winning because they were creating an app store that actually worked better for regular people. But in 2020, disaster struck. A massive security breach exposed user data from about 20 million Aptoide accounts. Emails, hashed passwords, and some payment details were compromised. Google immediately pounced, running these very public security awareness campaigns that were basically just saying,
"See, told ya."
App developers started pulling their apps. Users fled back to Google Play. It looked like the end of the road. The company's reputation was in tatters. After years of fighting to overcome their sketchy image, they were right back where they started. And let's be honest, it was a legitimate screw-up. No amount of David versus Goliath narrative changes the fact that they failed to protect their users' data. Instead of making excuses or downplaying the breach, Aptoide did something unexpected. they completely rebuilt their security infrastructure from the ground up. They hired some of the top security experts in Europe. They open-sourced their security protocols so independent researchers could verify them. They even created a bug bounty program that paid hackers to find vulnerabilities. And most impressively, they compensated affected users with premium accounts and credit. By mid-2024, they had emerged stronger than before. Their new security system was being praised as potentially more robust than Google's in some areas. As some random dude put it, sometimes you need to completely break something to rebuild it properly. Today, Aptoide isn't just surviving, it's thriving. They've expanded beyond just being an app store and have started creating tools for developers to distribute their apps however they want. Remember that 30% Google tax I mentioned? Well, thanks to pressure from Aptoide and others, Google has been forced to reduce their fees in many markets. More importantly, the EU's Digital Markets Act, which went into full effect this year, now requires Apple and Google to allow alternative app stores. That regulation exists in large part because of Aptoide's efforts. And we're starting to see the impacts. Last month, Apple finally opened iOS to alternative app stores for the first time ever. It's a limited implementation and they're still trying to maintain control, but the wall has been breached. What started as this tiny Portuguese side project has fundamentally changed how mobile app distribution works. They took a $1 trillion company and, against all odds, actually won. But the most interesting part to me isn't the David versus Goliath story. It's that Aptoide revealed something many of us suspected but couldn't prove. The App Store monopolies weren't really about security or user experience, they were about control and profit. When pushed, both Google and Apple had made concessions that they previously claimed would compromise user security. Turns out those dire warnings were maybe a bit exaggerated. This isn't to say security isn't important, it absolutely is, but it was being used as a shield to protect what are essentially extremely profitable toll booths on the digital economy. So is Aptoide safe to use now? Mostly, yeah. Their security has improved dramatically, and they've gotten much better at removing problematic apps. Is it for everyone? Probably not. If you're not comfortable venturing outside the Google/Apple ecosystem, that's totally fine. But the next time you get annoyed at Apple or Google's App Store policies, remember that alternatives exist. The mobile world doesn't have to be a walled garden controlled by two companies. And that's really the story of Aptoide. Not just a controversial app store, but a glimpse at what a more open mobile ecosystem could look like. Anyways, that's a wild story of the most controversial app store in history. If you've used Aptoide or have thoughts about alternative app stores, let me know in the comments. And speaking of controversial Android tools, my video on Lucky Patcher is even wilder. It shows how people are bypassing in-app purchases altogether. That video is popping up right about now. Check it out if you're curious about the grey areas of Android's ecosystem.